Welcome to acing behavioral interviews. This is going to be a longer video, but behavioral interviews are my bread and butter, so we're going to make sure that you absolutely destroy your behavioral interview. A lot of people buy into the myth that behavioral interviews are easy. I mean, the interviewer's just asking you questions about you, right? You know all the answers, you're prepared. Well, that's where you couldn't really be more wrong, because behavioral interviews need to be articulated well. They need to be very well thought out. And if you just kind of go in there thinking that you can come up with questions about you on the spot and tell stories well, you're wrong. Behavioral interviews are a skill, and they're one of the best interviews that you can have, that you can do well in, because as I've talked about before, but if your interviewer likes you, nothing else really matters. They're going to choose the people that they like the most. And your behavioral interview is really where you have the opportunity to connect with them, show your past experience, and show that why, even if you bombed a different interview, why you're the number one candidate for the position. So for those of you that don't know, the behavioral interview is essentially where the interviewer is just really looking to learn more about you, your background, and your prior experience. These are going to be questions such as, tell me a time when, what are your top 3 strengths and weaknesses, what's your past experience, when's a time you had to work with a challenging team member. They're questions that are really just prompting a discussion. And that's where it comes from a myth of they're easy, but they're really not. This chapter, we're going to break it up into 4 sections, and we're going to look at what the interviewers are looking for, how to prepare, how to execute, and finally, I'm going to show you a few examples of questions that I answered with. What are these behavioral interviewers really looking for? The 2 big things that they're looking for are 1, experience, 2, likability, which also includes cultural fit. In terms of experience, what these companies are looking for are really to find out how you performed in the past to see how you're going to perform in the future, because that's going to be one of the biggest indicators of your future for success. They're looking to see if you were just an owner or a participant, and how your relevant past experience is going to apply to this new job or position that you're interviewing for. A lot of people will lie or exaggerate on their resume to get the interview, but this is the interview where they're really going to find out if you're exaggerating and if you've actually done what you said you did. Another way to look at the experience part of what they're looking for, though, is that even though you may have done fantastic things that weren't on your resume, because I know a ton of people have sent me these resumes with like 10 bullets per experience, and you don't need to include those, you only need to include the top parts. But things that you think are really impressive that didn't have a chance to make to your resume, this is going to be the interview where you can include those things. The second piece they're looking for is likability or cultural fit. They're not necessarily looking for someone who's going to be their best friend and make them laugh, but they're just looking for a general chemistry. Are you going to vibe with the team? Will you be able to work with the other people who are on the product team? If you are a completely different personality or just the antithesis for your interview and you guys don't get along, you're not friendly, and it's not going to be fun to work with you, they're not going to hire you regardless if you sold a $1 billion company or not. They just want to make sure that you're going to fit in with the team. Again, the 2 traits that they're really looking for in this interview are your prior experience and your likability factor. In your stories, you really want to talk about the experiences that capture what it means to be a product manager, as we talked about before. Leadership, communication, technical ability, analytical skills, your ability to drive products, and your ability to reach goals. Any stories that incorporate these factors, or being a leader, or being an owner, or being able to launch a product, are really going to be the stories that you want to include. And just because something failed, that doesn't mean you can turn it into a great story. Being able to learn and grow from your failures is a really good skill to have. So just because something didn't turn out well, don't write it off as being a bad story or not. One of my best stories is about how I lost $4,000 freshman year. So remember, just go in with a smile and really try to emphasize the key experiences you've had that show that you would be a great product manager. Next, preparing for the behavioral interview is going to give you by far the best return on your investment for almost any other interview, because you are guaranteed that almost regardless with any company you interview for, there will be a behavioral interview that tests your past experience, your personality, and who you are. You really want to make sure that you know yourself inside and out and that you can crush any question that you get. The first step for preparing for this interview is that I want you to craft a mental library. Well, what is your mental library? This is going to be the library that you categorize and know all of your stories inside and out for every experience you've had. Some of these stories may never come up, they may never be used, but what we don't want to happen is that worst case scenario, you're asked a question in your interview and you can't come up with an answer. The second worst case is that you're using the same exact story and experience to answer every single question. What we want to do is we want to diversify our stories so that way we keep it interesting. If we always just reference the same thing, it's going to become boring for the interviewer, it's not going to be impressive, and you're going to lose out to candidates that have more experiences across a variety. For the mental library, what I want you to do is I want you to start with first semester freshman year, then go to second semester freshman year, and I want you to write down every single experience you had that semester. So first semester freshman year, it would be, for example, I was in this class, in this project, I did this in my club, I did XYZ. And then you're going to do that for the next semester. And you're going to write down everything you did that could come up in it that you could use in an interview. Then you're going to do your first internship. Then first semester, sophomore year of college, second semester, your second internship. And I want you to do that for every time. And you can even pull in high school if you want until this moment where you are now. And what that's going to do, it's just going to help you map out all of your experiences. And this is going to help you think of experiences that you may never have thought of during your interview, but could still be incredibly crucial. After you have your mental library set and you've listed out all of your clubs, experiences, and what you did in those, you want to categorize them. The 5 main categories we're looking for are leadership, teamwork, success, challenges, failures. You want to take all of your stories and experiences and categorize them by one of these characteristics. And you're going to break this down by your internships, your clubs, or additional random things that happened outside of these. What this is going to allow you to do is that when you're asked a question in an interview, you can think back like, oh, this is a leadership question. These are my stories for leadership. This is the story I'm going to use. And this is going to give you multiple examples that you're able to pull from. I've attached in the recruiting dashboard a matrix for you to fill out, and I've also included my own that you can use an example as well. After you filled out this matrix and you have your stories categorized by what type of experience they are and what experience they map to, you want to pick 5 key stories that can crush almost any question. Pretty much for myself, I could tell a story about any of my experience, but there was 5 stories that I could use to answer a bunch of different questions, and they were really, really good stories that I practiced telling a bunch. These are the stories you want to remember. And when picking these stories, you don't want 5 stories all that map to one experience or one characteristic. They don't have to be one leadership, one teamwork, one failure, one success, but there should be a bit of a variety. That way you can use them for multiple scenarios. If you have 5 leadership questions and you get asked about when you were a team member, it's going to be hard to answer that question. The 3 characteristics that you want to look for in a really good story are 1, that it's impressive, 2, it's easy to understand and follow, and 3, it communicates a key characteristic about yourself. Discussing those 3 characteristics I talked about. First, impressive. We want a story that the interviewer's never heard before and they're going to sit back and go, wow, I haven't heard this. Like this kid's super interesting and really impressive. If you tell a story about a project you worked on in your computer science class, every person interviewing has that story. You want something that's going to be unique to you. How you started a nonprofit, how you got something interesting to happen to you, just anything that you really created for yourself and is unique to you. For example, one of the things that I like to talk about is just my own business. My business is really unique and there's not a lot of people that have that same experience. So that's something that comes off as impressive and unique. For easy to understand, you just don't want to confuse your interviewer. For example, when I was a junior, I worked on a project that had a lot of legal restrictions. And due to the 3-tier system in the alcohol industry, that meant manufacturers could only sell to wholesalers who could only sell to bars. And explaining how my project fit into that legal system would probably take about 5 to 10 minutes. So instead, I just say legal restrictions and I cut out all of that. I make the story as easy to understand. And if your interviewer wants, they'll ask questions, but you want to keep it easy. If you try to include too many details, that's going to bog down the story, make it difficult to follow, make it confusing, and the interviewer is going to ask, why is he telling me this? Sometimes you don't need all the details you think you do to make a story really compelling. So make sure that anyone could understand the story in just a few minutes. Finally, communicating a key characteristic about you. You don't want to just tell willy-nilly stories because you think they're good, or maybe you're telling the stories that are all just saying that you're bold. You want to communicate stories that each kind of show a different characteristic about you so that you're able to learn from failure, you're able to be scrappy, you're able to be independent. And when picking these stories, you want to look for characteristics that we've talked about before that they're looking for in product managers. So a story that communicates that you're a leader, you're a self-starter, you're scrappy, you like to move fast, and you're able to reach goals is going to be a home run story. We're looking for the stories that are going to show that you are able to make a great product manager. In the end, I want you to have 5 stories that you can just crush 90% of the question with. And when thinking about these stories, don't be too concerned about time. Time shouldn't be a huge factor. Time constraints are put in place when people do interview prep to limit yourself from bogging down too many details. As long as the story has a great beginning, great middle, a great conclusion, flows very nicely, and is always keeping the interviewer engaged and interested, that's going to be a great story. Additionally, I don't want you to memorize these stories. If you memorize these stories word for word, it's going to come off as very unnatural, very unengaging, and it's not going to be very dynamic. When you tell the story, I want it to be nearly identical every single time, but I want you to memorize those main points in the story and connect those again, and again. If you forget something, it's always okay at the end to just say, oh, I also just want to add. So don't be too worried, but don't memorize it word for word. You want it to be as natural as possible.